Mr. Ivor Ambrose is the Managing Director and the co-founder of ENAT, a European Network for Accessible Tourism, a non-profit association based in Brussels. He holds a master's degree in environmental psychology from the University of Surrey in the UK, and the title of senior researcher from the Danish Building Research Institute. For the past 30 years, he has been actively engaged in research and development on accessibility and inclusion of disabled and elderly people. He now specializes in the promotion and development of accessible tourism, working as a consultant on accessible tourism development for the European Commission, Tourist Board, Regions, Destination and Enterprise. So it's a pleasure to...
Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, I'm going to talk about some of the other aspects of tourism accessibility, not covered by the previous speakers, I think, because we've been talking and hearing about access to the built environment, to buildings and construction, and also to the measurement, in Roberto's case, of mostly the physical aspects, but I know there are other details included in the Village for All system. So my challenge here is to explain to you in three parts what's happening. As you see, we've got a new logo to attach to ENAT there called Work in Progress on this slide, because we are working towards some guidelines for the universal design of tourism services. And not standards, but guidelines, because we think standards take rather a long time to make, there is also a certain hesitancy or reluctance about having too many standards, especially in the tourism sector, which suffers from a lot of red tape, as they call it, in the first place. But standards aren't just a matter of having rules to follow and things that you have to do. They are actually useful tools for making sure that everybody can deliver their services more effectively across different regions and so on. So I'll say in three parts what we're doing here. Firstly, talk a little bit about why we need some kind of guidelines for services and how we can help to design those. And secondly, to talk about a specific project that we've been trying to launch in Europe about a SEN workshop agreement, which you'll hear about. And then finally, I'll give you a taste of a universal design guideline for customer engagement or communications with customers, which has been developed by the Irish Standards Board and developed into a toolkit by the National Disability Authority in Ireland, working with the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design in Dublin, so that you can see something very concrete and positive about what you can do with standards or guidelines for the area of services. And the Irish example is also free of charge, and you can download it and start using it tomorrow. So the key challenges, I think, for the implementation of universal design of tourism services are firstly, oh sorry, yes, I'm changing here, but I have to change there as well, are to do with management policies and practices. We have to focus on how to manage the tourism services. We also have to focus on staff skills and training. How do you welcome everybody? There is a big area concerning information and communications design. How do you make your communications accessible to everybody and what formats to use and so on. Transport and passenger services, these also come under services. And in the case of environments and buildings and facilities, I would link that more specifically to the recommendations, standards and guidelines that we've heard about for the physical environment. It's a different issue than talking about services really, but it's very connected. So how you deliver a service depends very much on the design and the way a building or facility can facilitate the services that you're trying to produce. In terms of, there are always studies about these things, but just one little quote from about services is that one of the most positive experiences were to be found at businesses where there was a high level of customer service and awareness from staff. I mean, services, we won't go on about that too long, but it's very important, and people feel customers know a good service when they get one, and they certainly know a bad service when they don't get that good service. And services are important for the visitor, they're important for the businesses, and they're important for destinations. It's the whole spectrum we have to think about when we're trying to design a guideline for accessible and universal design of tourism services. The visitors, of course, are all kinds of different people, and they're looking for different kinds of experiences, and their particular problem in finding accessible tourism, which we're talking about here, is that the travel is difficult for people with disabilities, unpredictable, sometimes even impossible, and the quality of infrastructure, transport, services and information varies widely from place to place. So this adds lots of layers of complexity. And there is a lack of standards and even guidelines, which only increases the uncertainty. You don't really know what you're going to expect, and it reduces the travel options. It also makes a lack of accountability, so that you can't go back to a business and say, but you were going to sell me this and you haven't delivered it, if we haven't got good standards. So standards or guidelines for services can also improve that accountability. You may have seen a diagram something like this, but we use this quite a lot, the accessible visitor journey. And it's important to take into account every step of the journey, all this journey from the travel decision at 1 o'clock to booking at 3 o'clock. It has to be made easier and accessible, through to at 5 o'clock, traveling to the destination, the actual movement through space, going to different places. All the elements must meet access requirements. At the destination, at 8 o'clock, we've got the destination experience. At 9 o'clock, the travel from the destination. And at 11, 12 o'clock, we've got recollection of the experience. All the kind of things that you've done on your holidays, you want to recollect them again, and maybe you have a positive or negative view. But if we don't build in accessibility in all the phases of the journey, we will find that the customer is not going to have a satisfactory experience, and they're going to want to move on. I mean, they'll go somewhere else. The chain of accessibility, you must have heard this phrase before, but you know, if a chain is broken because of lack of access, then it's just not going to serve the customer's needs. For businesses, they need to know about how to deliver good services. And really, the problem for the tourism industry, that the accessible tourism market is relatively unknown. It seems difficult to attract with existing channels. And visitors' needs and requirements are unknown or misunderstood, and therefore the market is avoided. And the investment costs are misunderstood and exaggerated. So access is seen mainly as a problem rather than a golden opportunity. In terms of the value chain, we have to focus on information, transport, infrastructure, and, as I say here, services. And I'm going to focus on information and services in the remainder of this presentation. So, in Europe, we've had a lot of discussion over the life of ENAT, really, because we started in 2008. And early on, there was a report that came from the AFNOR, the French standards organization, on developing guidelines or standards in the area of tourism. Or in the area of accessibility, I should say. And one of the recommendations of that report from 2009 was to develop a guidance document in partnership with SEN, the European Standards Committee, a guidance document on universal design of tourism services. And 2009 is a long time ago, but we still haven't made this guideline. And we had proposed this. One of the first things we did as ENAT was that we put together a proposal which drifted around the community for some years, actually, because the point about having the support of SEN is very important to get some kind of authoritative view of and a procedure to follow to make this guideline. And of course, to get that work done, we need some financing. And we have applied to the European Commission, but only as late as 2013 for this SEN workshop agreement to be started. And we didn't get a successful reply because things are moving on, and as Katerina pointed out, the European Commission is thinking of a European Accessibility Act, and therefore they might be more interested in having a standard than a guideline. As we've always argued, you need a guideline before you can get to a standard. So we're still working on this. The SEN workshop agreement is a very specific process, and it usually takes 12 to 18 months. It's not just one workshop, it's a long-term work led by a team of experts, and all stakeholders can participate. And although this is in Europe, this agreement, which should produce a document, a consensus guidance document with all the stakeholders, can also involve international participants as well, not just European. The document then is valid for 3 years, and it may be the basis for an eventual standard, but the main point is that this can be distributed through national bodies, and we have asked the Commission, if they fund this, that they would distribute it free of charge and downloadable as a PDF publication. So, yes, I'm just pointing out that that was the background study in 2009. I'll come on to something else now, because we're at that stage of limbo. It's work in progress. We haven't gone further with that at the moment, but I want to show you this Irish standard, which is available online and downloadable free of charge. And this was produced in 2013, a standard on the universal design for customer engagement in tourism services, which is a fancy name, fancy way of saying, how to provide information to customers. But it's not just one-way information, it's two-way information. It's what happens when customers telephone and how they are treated. It's broken down into 4 sections. So first of all, you need the guideline, you need the standard, and they've produced this standard on the basis of research, best practice examples, of consultation, including consultation with ENAT and other organizations in Europe, and then they've come up with a standard. In these 4 areas, covering electronic-based communications, or internet, if you like, emails and so on, written communications, how you should write to customers, visitors, telephone communications, and face-to-face communications. The link is on this slide, and I can give it to you, or we can give it to you in a printed format afterwards, I'm sure. All this will be on the internet as well, on the website. So I'll just talk you through one of the most interesting thing about this is that you don't just make a standard, but you actually, so thank you very much, you don't just make a standard, but you go on to make a toolkit. The Irish have gone on to make a toolkit which enables you to use the standard, because a standard is a very dry document, no pictures. In fact, it's not a good example of how to communicate with anybody. It tends to be very dry and straightforward, but the toolkit, which you'll find at universaldesign.ie, and I'll talk to you briefly about it now, is ready and available. It talks about requirements and guidance for tourism service providers in the provision of tourism products and communications, and it gives you this toolkit, which will then, I'll just give you an outline. It's got 4 main parts: the business case and overview, written communication, I think I've said this already, face-to-face communication, video, non-verbal behavior, and electronic and web-based communication. So the guide is written the way they say they want you to communicate. It's got nice pictures, diagrams, drawings, all the way through, and explains very nicely how this can be done. The benefits, and I'm coming to the end of my time now, but the benefits to adopting universal design have also been investigated by the Irish team that made this, and they found in the research that they did, testing the early versions of the documents and the toolkit, were that 52% of customers purchase more from a business as a result of a good customer experience. 2/3 of customers are willing to spend an average of 13% more with a business they believe provides good customer service. And 24% of customers will continue to use service providers for 2 or more years after good experiences. The customer engagement toolkit is also useful directly for training. You can use it for training staff who are in frontline positions, but also management. And of course, it's useful as well for everyday use in a business when you're going to design a form, a brochure, signage, websites, or apps, or when you're outsourcing work as well, you can use it as a way of specifying to your graphics design people how to do it. And as a refresher, you can use this checklist in a practical way every day. So they're looking at the possibility now that with this good guidance, you can actually increase the number of repeat customers, improve the word-of-mouth referrals, and improve how to communicate to a wider market. They are making now video case studies with studies with real people in real places, Irish hotels, tour operators, a gastro pub, a family bed and breakfast, an adventure centre and West of Ireland family-run hotel. And these should be ready at the end of this month. And they'll be put online as well. So all of this material, which is already online, can also be used by you. You can download it and use it freely in training. I think it's something that's very useful. But it shows how much information you need just on one subject, on customer communications. And when I said at the very beginning that we wanted to develop a set of guidelines for universal design of tourism services, we are covering an even wider spectrum, but at least the Irish have done this part for us. So we will recommend this when we're talking about accessibility, and all the advantages of accessibility are listed for you here, that you get much more advantage from accessibility, universal design in your tourism destination by communicating well with your customers and adapting and making your services accessible for everybody. It's about giving more value to customers, but you cannot enforce many of these things for businesses if they cannot achieve them, if they haven't the money or the competence to do it. So it's about getting this balance right, improving the value to visitors and achievability for businesses, so that all will win, the visitors, the businesses, and the destinations. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brittany Perez, and I work at the Center for Inclusive Design and Environmental Access in Buffalo, New York, at the University at Buffalo under Dr. Ed Steinfeld. We do a lot of universal design and accessibility research, and your talks were fascinating. Thank you so much. We are in the process of working on universal design standards and just had a state of the science on universal design in the United States. And what we found so far, well, we found that the need for universal design guidelines and standards is necessary because the Americans with Disabilities Act is a minimum set of requirements and law, and based on our anthropometric research that we've done in our center, many of those minimum requirements are no longer adequate for the population and makes the environment not usable for the majority of people. So we know that there's a need for universal design, and we hear the same exact sentiment that often law or requirements is not the way to go, that a set of guidelines is better. What we're battling with is getting people to buy in. And I don't mean financially. These would be provided free. But how have you addressed getting people to buy into using guidelines that are not requirements, that are not laws? Can you speak a little bit on your experience with that?
Who feels comfortable to give an answer?
I can put my headphones on.
OK. Je peux essayer de répondre. Je vais répondre en français, par exemple. Ouais. Je vais attendre qu'elle mette sa traduction. Je dirais que c'est très difficile. C'est très difficile d'amener les gens à faire plus que les exigences de base. Ça prend des leaders qui sont sensibilisés, puis qui ont une volonté, puis qui comprennent que ça va servir à tous leurs citoyens. Et ça, c'est pas dans toutes les communautés qu'on a ces leaders-là. Et donc, c'est ça qui est la clé. Puis ensuite, la difficulté, c'est que ce qu'on a comme idée, ben ça puisse se concrétiser par des résultats, parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'étapes dans un projet. Puis souvent, ben au cours de ces étapes-là, il y a des choix. Puis les choix d'accessibilité ou de universal design qu'on a fait au départ, ben on les met de côté à cause des autres contraintes. Donc, assez rarement, on a des réalisations qui correspondent vraiment à ce qu'on voulait avoir, puis ce que nos leaders inspirés voulaient avoir. Donc, c'est extrêmement difficile. Avoir des guidelines, avoir des standards qui vont qui vont permettre à ceux qui peuvent aller plus loin ou qui sont prêts à s'engager à aller plus loin, c'est une bonne chose, mais augmenter le minimum parce que qu'on essaie de sensibiliser, il va toujours avoir beaucoup de concepteurs puis de promoteurs qui vont vouloir faire le minimum. Donc, il faut augmenter aussi en parallèle ce minimum-là. Et nous, c'est ce qu'on a constaté dans l'étude qu'on a faite, c'est qu'à une certaine période, le Québec était quand même relativement bien placé par rapport au minimum, mais depuis une vingtaine d'années, les autres pays ont évolué beaucoup plus rapidement que nous. On est resté à notre minimum ici. Donc, c'est un gros défi, là. Et je pense que les consommateurs doivent le demander également. C'est ça qui va mettre de la pression pour qu'il y ait un intérêt.
Katharina will answer your question too. So.
Thank you. I agree it's a very complicated procedure, but I think we need two things. First of all, as we said about inspired leaders, I truly believe the high-level decision makers should be the ones to be educated. Because this is, to be honest, this is my dream in the European Commission, Union, to see the leaders, the decision makers, to be forced to have a course to understand the issues and to understand that when we say accessibility is about sustainable development, is not only enabling disabled people and say words hidden or wrapped up in a nice paper. We have to really understand what it means. And this is why I believe in legislation, and especially in projects that are funded with public money. Because when there is a procedure of requiring minimum and accessibility, and checking the accessibility is the only way to be sure you're going to have accessibility. We're going to make a more accessible and sustainable environment. And then the private sector will follow, because the leaders, the decision makers, and the public sector is leading the way. So it's both. I think it's very important to educate the decision makers and to have law that enforces accessibility.
Thank you, Katharina. Other question?
Could I say something on the?
Oh, sorry.
The answer? Just a little. I just want to say that I think it's a very good point, very good question, and I hope I've tried to show that when you're talking about design of services, and how that affects people's experience in the tourism sector, I think maybe it's easier, for a tourism enterprise, a business owner, to understand that the way they design their services is going to have a very direct effect on their customer. There seems to be a gap between the services over here and the building over there. And when somebody's doing something to the building, they think, oh, we have to follow the rules, we have to follow the law. But when it's to do with the services, I think they can see a more immediate feedback. There's a shorter feedback loop there in the kind of return on investment that you can do. So if you've got a nice, like the Irish have done, I think that's a good example of what you can do, because you can go straight to the owner and say, try this toolkit. So they're not giving people the standard and say, here's the standard and go away and do what it says. But you give people tools so that they know what to do and how to do and why to do it, because it's very important that the toolkit really explains why you're doing something, to make your visual statements more easy to understand, you use a certain font size because of this. So when it's explained in a toolkit as a training or learning exercise, I think that gets the message across much easier, and people are less resistant to that kind of message than they are to being told what to do.
Tous, donc merci pour vos présentations. Donc Jean-Philippe Chouika, moi j'ai fondé une société Cap Access en France qui accompagne donc les établissements publics et privés dans la mise en accessibilité. Alors c'était juste alors ça complète un petit peu ce que vous avez dit. Merci pour votre étude, j'ai très hâte de la lire sur le site de Keroul parce que ça va être extraordinaire. Et puis donc on a une loi, je crois qu'il faut qu'on en parle de cette loi française, elle a été abordée dans votre étude. Elle est très ambitieuse, cette loi française. C'est les dirigeants qui décident que tout le monde doit être accessible. Tout le monde. Établissement neuf et établissement existant. Avec un cadre normatif, avec des lois. Elle est très belle cette loi, elle est très ambitieuse, mais c'est une usine à gaz. il y a des ordonnances, il y a des arrêtés, il y a des dérogations, il y a des atténuations. Alors, qu'est-ce que ça va donner dans 3 à 9 ans? J'espère qu'on sera peut-être le pays européen le plus accessible. On a un très mauvais caractère, les Français, donc du coup on a une très belle loi. Voilà. Donc elle est contraignante. Juste pour ajouter, Katrina, si vous m'en voulez pas, je crois que mon anglais peut-être m'a joué des tours, mais je crois que vous avez une slide où vous dites que il y a 4 pays où dans la construction des bâtiments, on doit avoir, il y a des exigences, et je vois la France n'apparaît pas dans ces 4 pays, alors qu'il y a depuis 2007 des obligations dans les bâtiments neufs pour que les bâtiments soient existants et également pour les bâtiments neufs pour qu'ils soient accessibles et pour que les bâtiments existants soient accessibles aussi. Donc c'est une obligation légale en France. C'est très contraignant, c'est très très dur. Mais c'était juste pour noter ce petit point aussi.
Okay, but I don't. Maybe is it a new law or is it was existing before?
Oh, the law is for, date before 2005, and then there's
Yeah, so maybe-
exigence from 2007.
I'm sorry,
January
I don't
the
know.
1st.
Maybe I have to look. Maybe it was missed out in the study or in
Okay.
the results.
Ok.
Okay.
Donc, en fait, c'était juste pour compléter, plus qu'une question, voilà, sur cette loi française qui est extraordinaire. Et juste une chose, donc pour compléter, il y a une loi, il y a du bâti, il y a des bâtiments, mais je crois que la suite aussi, il y a une deuxième chose dont j'entends pas trop parler, c'est le label Tourisme et Handicap qui est représenté par sa présidente Annette Masson qui est présente sur le salon. Et ça va être la suite, puisque le label, en fait, va apporter plus d'accessibilité au niveau des services, du comportement. Et donc, je crois que les lois sont importantes pour la base, le bâti, mais qu'après, la volonté, les labels iront plus loin sur les services et sur le comportement. Ce sera l'avenir. Voilà.
Bon, alors, on a empiété au niveau du temps. Je sais que Roberto a une présentation à 11 heures. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Sinon, je vais remercier nos présentateurs, puis aussi voir, en fait, que ce fameux débat entre les lois et les guides reste ouvert. Hein, si je comprends bien, il y a un compromis entre les deux outils. Puis, ce qui est intéressant aussi des présentations, j'ai trouvé, c'est qu'on a vu la question de l'accessibilité pour les designers, donc les concepteurs, les usagers et aussi les entreprises. Donc, je pense que c'est aussi global à ce niveau-là. Donc, il y a peut-être des outils de communication qui sont propres à chacun de ces publics-là. Les guidelines, peut-être, ou la loi est peut-être mieux pour les architectes, les designers ou même les propriétaires, mais pour les usagers, je pense que les guidelines, ou en tout cas, dépendant de à qui on adresse l'outil, je pense que c'est un élément intéressant là, qui est ressorti. Oui? Est-ce que, ceux qui ont acquitté, peut-être pour 11 heures, peuvent le faire, si vous voulez. Sinon, il peut y avoir une autre question.
Oui, bonjour, je me présente, Cédric Guilleux, je suis donc à Société Agencée. Je m'occupe de tout ce qui est formation en conseil à l'accueil des PMR en hôtellerie. Et également, je me charge de tout ce qui est documentation adaptée à destination, donc dans le cadre des grandes compagnies qui souhaitent mettre en place justement une documentation adaptée pour les différents types de handicap. Une question en fait qui se pose pas mal aujourd'hui, c'est notamment dans le cadre des multinationales qui agissent. J'ai eu l'occasion par exemple de travailler dernièrement avec la Brittany Ferries, qui est implantée en Grande-Bretagne, mais qui a des actions sur le territoire français, espagnol et anglais, bien évidemment. Et du coup, dans le cadre des documentations adaptées, on se retrouve à avoir une certaine confusion dans ce qui est préconisé. Et c'est vrai que du coup, on a au final, dans la création des documents, on a la création du document d'information et sécuritaire pour l'ensemble de leur clientèle, valide. On a après une documentation qui est demandée pour les PMR, on va dire plutôt handicap moteur, qui met en évidence des points sécuritaires d'évacuation ou des informations d'accessibilité du type la hauteur des tables, des hauteurs de tables qui sont adaptées aux poncistes par exemple, pour un restaurant ou autre. On va avoir une documentation qui va être pour tout ce qui est handicap cognitif, donc qui avec des pictogrammes simplifiés, qui également convient à une clientèle plutôt malentendante. Et puis on va avoir également, pour tout ce qui est déficience visuelle, du coup une documentation qui va être en caractère 16, contraste augmenté. Et éventuellement, idéalement, on va avoir aussi cette documentation-là qui va être déclinée en braille, en français et en anglais. Donc on se retrouve avec un nombre de brochures incalculable. Et c'est vrai qu'au milieu de ça, on ne sait pas vraiment qu'est-ce que l'on doit... comment le réduire, parce qu'on a un problème également après d'utilisation au niveau de l'accueil en termes de distribution. Les agents d'accueil après n'utilisent pas forcément toutes les brochures parce qu'ils ne se rendent pas forcément compte des besoins de chacun, et du coup on a un peu une confusion dans tout ça.
Et votre question?
Du coup, pardon, excusez-moi. Du coup, justement, c'était pour savoir est-ce qu'aujourd'hui il y a vraiment quels sont vraiment les standards à employer pour convenir au maximum en minimisant justement cette quantité pour dériver sur chaque, au niveau des brochures et autres, des documentations, qu'est-ce qui peut être recommandé?
Est-ce que quelqu'un... Is there someone to...
I think you just have to work it out.
you have to work it out.
Who are your customers? Find out who are your customers. I mean, I think it's going to be a case by case issue, depending on the number of customers, where they come from, and what type. But I can understand your question that there's a need for some general rule of thumb, as we say in English, you know. But I think I don't think we've got that far yet. So you're going to be the first.
Moi, je rajouterais, nous, à Montréal, on a travaillé sur les communications universellement accessibles pour éviter justement la multiplication des documents. Et la base, c'est d'avoir une communication de base qui est la plus universelle possible. Donc, essayer dans notre document de base que ça soit le plus simple à comprendre pour l'ensemble de notre public, en intégrant des polices qui sont faciles à lire avec une taille de caractère qui est un petit peu plus grosse que nos pratiques habituelles pour arriver à ce que notre document de base soit le plus universel. Et quand il y a des gens pour qui ce n'est pas suffisant, à ce moment-là, on regarde qui est notre public et à ce moment-là, on produit certains documents adaptés, mais où on n'a pas besoin de travailler en silo pour chacune des clientèles avec des documents très spécifiques. C'est ça, l'accessibilité universelle, hein? C'est de rehausser la fonctionnalité des choses, puis pas seulement des bâtiments, pour tous les citoyens, pour avoir le moins possible besoin d'avoir des accommodements puis des choses qui sont parallèles.
D'accord. Merci bien.
Bon, alors, merci à vous tous et aux présentateurs. Donc, bonne continuation.